thank you for joining us. This is a webinar hosted by, or I guess put on by the SALT committee. SALT standing for social awareness and living truth. And really what the SALT committee does is we provide resources for pastors and leaders like yourself to share along with their congregations on the issues of the day. And the topics that we've chosen to delve into as a committee, we were part of we did the sexuality, we've done worldviews, and now we're talking about sanctity of life. And these really were suggestions of topics that came from people throughout the denomination. And as a committee, what we do is we seek out experts to be able to delve into the topics for us. We don't purport to be the experts on it. We are more the editors of it in the stage. And so today we're very privileged to have two people with us, Deve Persad and Jutta Wittmeier, who are indeed experts on the topics in which they are going to be sharing with us. So before we start, I'm going to pray, and then I'll kind of give a layout of how the time's going to go. So let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you so very much for your presence in our lives. Thank you that you honor life, you give life, you preserve life, and you choose the time that our life here on earth ends. And so, Father, you are there from the beginning to the end. And as your child, you're there with us throughout eternity as well. So we thank you. Thank you for that. Lord, help us to keep that in mind today, even as we listen. Give us a posture of learning. May we catch a fresh glimpse today of what your view and what your esteem for life and the sanctity of it is. Pray that you'd be with Jutta and Dave as they share, and Lord, that you would just enliven our hearts and minds to who you are today. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. I should introduce myself. I'm Rosemary Flighton. I'm from Calgary, 10 Center Street Church, and I'm one of the members of the SALT committee. So what this is going to look like today, it's going to be the format of the webinar is maybe a little bit different than some of the other ones that may have had. We're actually going to do a little bit more kind of interview style, going back and forth between Dave and Jutta, and they'll be working through some of the material that they have in their papers. Now, if you haven't seen those papers or you don't have them handy, I believe we're going to put the link in the chat so that you can have that. I encourage you to have it handy. So you might want to circle some things. You're not going to walk through the paper. That's not it. You're all able to read and figure that out. But just to have them as a ready resource would probably be helpful. We are inviting your questions. So, as I said earlier, the purpose of SALT was to provide resources to pastors and, and leaders. And it isn't valuable unless it speaks to a need that you have. And so as we're going along, you've got a question that you want answered, put that in the chat. I'm going to be monitoring the chat. A few others are going to be helping me with that. I may not grab it right away, because if I know we're going somewhere, then I'll just wait for our speakers to get there. But we really want this to be of benefit to you. So please put in your questions around this topic. Maybe it's specific to, the questions that are coming to you from congregants. Maybe it's from people in your community, but help us make this relevant to your need. And we only can do that by having feedback from you as we're going along. So we'll be doing that until about 10 after the next hour, depending where you are. Here in Calgary, that would be 12:10, but depending, you figure out the time zone on that one. And at that time, we are going to have one breakout group. Where for about 12 minutes, there'll be 3 of you, and we'll be asking these 3 questions. This is for those of you who like to think ahead. These are the 3 questions you're going to be asked to talk about in the breakout room. The first one is, what's one thing that you've learned today? So kind of, your thinking, the way you view these topics maybe has been shifted or challenged a little bit. So what's one thing you learned? And then make it practical. What's one thing that you can do to honor life in your community? So those will be the 2 questions that you'll have a chance to talk through in the group. Do that for about 10 minutes, bring back just for some closing remarks, and then we'll be finished. We'll be out of here by 1/2 next hour. So an hour and a half. Just a little bit of Zoom protocol. Make sure that you are on mute and that we are being recorded, and that this will be going on YouTube. If you have a problem with that, maybe just keep your your video off, but nothing that you say in the breakout groups will be recorded, so you don't have to worry about that. And the only way that people would hear anything is if you were actually speaking. So a little bit of assurance there. So I think that's it in terms of some of the house cleaning items. So let's get into it. I want to introduce to you Dave Persad. Dave has been learning and developing as a follower of Jesus since he was 19. So I have you kind of had a question when I read that. I thought, okay, so what was he doing for those first 19 years? So much for elementary school and high school. But I'm taking that actually means you became a follower of Jesus at 19. He and his wonderful wife, Amanda, have been married for 27 years, and they have 2 children. Ainsley, who I see is on this call. Welcome, Ainsley, and also a son, Jared, who recently was married to Caitlin. He has a desire to bring the message and mercy and mission of Jesus to the world. And since 2001, he's been part of the pastoral team at Sarnia EMC Church in Sarnia, Ontario. And in 2016, he graduated with a doctorate in global and international leadership from George Fox University. I also want to introduce to you Jutta Wittmeier, who is the Executive Director of the Calgary Pregnancy Care Center. And she began at the Calgary Pregnancy Care Center as a volunteer almost 30 years ago. And since then, she has transitioned through client services director, and is now the Executive Director. She's co-authored a book on adoption called Affirming the Birth Mother's Journey. And Jutta is highly respected in the churches and the non-for-profit community in Calgary, across Alberta and Canada. She's a sought-after speaker and advocate for the care of women around the topic of abortion, but also in grief and trauma awareness counseling, and just as a real firm commitment to providing relevant, sensitive, and meaningful opportunities for healing. I've had the privilege of knowing Jutta for probably close to those 30 years, or at least 25. And personally, I have gleaned much from her knowledge. You can see in the background her bookshelf. That's the tidy bookshelf. And probably like all of us, we have tidy bookshelves, and then we have the real ones. I've seen her real one. It looks nothing like that. So don't think that she's some Wonder Woman to keep her bookshelves like that. It's not true. So with those introductions, I want to let's go into the topic. Dave, you wrote a broad spectrum paper on the sanctity of life. And so that we're all on the same page about that. What do you mean by the sanctity of life? And then why do you think it's important for Christians, and specifically pastors and leaders, to talk about it?
Yeah, well, thanks, Rosemary, for facilitating this and for being part of the SALT team and helping to refine and challenge our thinking on this material, that's for sure. Sanctity of life is a term, being a pastor and having served now for these 20 years, we are used to using these terms, sanctity of life. And what does it actually mean? It means God views life as holy. He thinks life is so important. He has created it uniquely, personally, and intricately. It is something that he just has a top level view of, and that is all of human life. And we see that, and I'm just going to read a couple of verses from Psalm 8, which is kind of the filter through which these thoughts have come from. It says, "What is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You have made them a little lower than the angel and crowned them with glory and honor. You've made them rulers over the works of your hands and have put everything under their feet." God views life as holy, all of life. And one of the struggles that I have had in my pastoral career is we often, when it comes to the idea of sanctity of life, we understand that concept. However, we can do a lot of harm by the way we talk about those who oppose it. And so we talk more about acts, the actions revolving sanctity of life, rather than life as itself. And so in so doing, we can actually undermine, threaten, and minimize the value of life. And so instead, I think we ought to be those who speak life, who promote the idea of life, and in fact are guarding life, as opposed to just limiting it to calling out indiscretions of life. So that's kind of where we're coming from with the idea of sanctity of life.
Pardon me. Yeah, I really like that phrase, the guarding of life, that, if we truly believe it's holy, if it's God-given to be somebody who guards life, I think it gives it almost a different mandate to us, doesn't it? You say in the paper that, and I'll quote, "We honor God through both our spiritual rituals and our everyday choices, how we respond to people and to the issues that impact life," end of quote. So what do you see or hear from pastors and in our churches that would cause you to be concerned that there may be some dissonance between what we believe and how we live?
Yeah, so, and I guess when you ask that in terms of what we see and hear from pastors, please keep in mind that one of those people is me. And as starting in my ministry life and being involved in a community where these issues are around. And so the 5 that we've centered on as an overview in this initial paper that'll continue to be developed are First Nations issues and human trafficking, which is really an invisible crime in our culture and in our country. Abortion, which we'll speak more extensively, and Jutta's done a marvelous job on her paper, and I would recommend you read it. And medical assistance in death, and so those issues, and racism. So those issues, when we started talking about, when we started into this paper on this overview paper, was before the summer of 2020. And since the summer of 2020, most, if not all of these issues have come to significant national prominence in a much greater degree than we had even anticipated, I think. And so they do require our attention. But I think often in my own conversations with my area network and with other pastors and leaders, there's a hesitance to address those in a congregational setting. One, probably because they're politically volatile, to some degree, some of them. Secondly, a lot of them are messy. There's a lot of mess around helping both victims and confronting perpetrators and the continuation of these things. And we don't necessarily, as pastors, we don't really want messy on our Sunday morning celebrations. And so unfortunately, we keep that information away from our church families in that way. And the other part probably also, and it's a harsh reality, is it takes a long time when you delve into these things, both with dealing with changes as well as addressing those who are victimized. It takes a long commitment to walk with somebody, and often our ministry schedules rob us of that privilege of being able to walk with people through these circumstances. So that's kind of why I'm really passionate about sharing these things, not only with our congregation, but with other church leaders. And I'm so thankful for the platform that the SALT Commission has given, not only in the writing of the paper, but also in this format as well.
Yeah, thanks. You said it could be political, it's messy, it takes time. And I think also the reality is our congregations aren't homogenous. We don't all see this the same way. And so there's always the potential it can be divisive as well within it. So yeah. For
sure. And I think I would maybe just add in there, Rosemary, just in terms of that, if anybody else has any other reasons as to why they might hesitate, I would feel free to drop those in the chat as well. I think understanding those continually helps us to prepare to engage other people as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we've set this up as kind of a dialogue between Dave and Jutta and I, but we actually want it to be a dialogue of 30 in the sense that you get to add yours as well via the chat. So please remember to do that. I mean, do you have any examples, any kind of stories that you could share with us, Dave, around this, where you've seen this at play in your congregation or in other congregations?
Probably, for us, and I'll share a little bit more extensively on this later, but probably in our congregational setting, the topic of human trafficking has one that has been pretty central for us. And it's been a slow progress over the last 9 or 10 years, a slow understanding, growing understanding of the significance of human trafficking in Canada and now in our region. And it was really, we were reluctant as a congregation, as a board, as a leadership team to delve in there. But once we took our time and started learning, attending workshops and seminars and gathering information and learning from other organizations, we recognized that this was a place that continues to be shrouded in darkness and needs the light of Jesus. And yet, as we have grown and developed in some of our understanding of that, having those conversations with other pastors and ministry, hardly anybody is willing to have somebody come and speak about the issues that inform the continuation of human trafficking. And that's where most people are gathered on a Sunday morning. And that's where most people are either affected by it to some degree or another. And so again, because it's messy, because it takes a long walk down a slow, winding road with people, and because there's so much residual effect to delving into those topics. So that's probably where I would say is our greatest understanding of just how difficult these things are.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you brought out in your paper is that there's the five topics, as you mentioned, but they all fall under this umbrella of the sanctity of life or the guarding of life. And so, yeah, your church may have kind of stepped into the pond on the topic of human trafficking, but the principles are applicable wherever. And I think that's what I really love about the papers that were put together, is it draws from that central importance of the sanctity, the guarding of life. So thanks for that example. Yeah. Okay, let's move over to Jutta. You're going to get your chance now. So from your perspective, Jutta, why is abortion a sanctity of life issue? Why should it be included in this topic? Jutta, you're on mute.
Yeah, that's not useful. I won't get in trouble if I'm on mute. So I decided to take this from a little more personal perspective. So I prepared a little bit of a personal, I'm just going to speak to you from a more personal part, and hope that this kind of informs where I'm coming from. So the first time abortion became more than a social problem to me was when, newly pregnant and teaching second grade, a child in my class was diagnosed with German measles. I knew German measles was devastating to the fetus in the early stages, so was immediately concerned. I quickly went to speak to the school nurse. I'll never forget her words as she sent me home with the doctor's name. "You know," she said, "if you get German measles, you'll have to have an abortion." That's when the concept first became real. It became even more real in the next week when I went to my doctor to confirm my pregnancy and talk about possible outcomes. As my husband and I talked and worried, we knew that as Christians, abortion was not an option for us. When I held my newborn son in my arms, I remember thinking, this is the person they were so casual about. I knew then that abortion wasn't just an idea. It was about real people, people who are afraid, people who are being pressured, ordinary people like me who are suddenly faced with a decision that they're not ready or prepared to make. I then began to think, as you're doing, about what my response to abortion should be. It was no longer an issue, it was personal. I started doing research, trying to find my way through. What I discovered was, even those many years ago, aggression and polarization. I decided to join a pro-life group. sent in my membership fees, and started receiving their mail. It was filled with political rhetoric and images that, even though I was clearly pro-life and a Christian, just didn't feel right to me. This was not who I was. So in response to the issue of unwanted babies, we as a family began to foster. The issue became even more personal as we cared for infants who many thought were unwanted, a burden to society, and whose parents were stigmatized as not worthy or capable of raising a child. But in our family, these children were people, wanted and loved by us and by God. These children were brought into the world by parents who were in circumstances that in my sheltered world were almost unimaginable. Years later, I began my journey with the pregnancy center as a volunteer. There I came face to face with the women who were, like me as a young woman, faced with a decision to carry or choose abortion. I heard story after story, saw different choices being made, and felt burdened and responsible for what happened to them. I had now entered their stories. Abortion had a face. I've been privileged to co-facilitate post-abortion groups led by compassionate colleagues who have personally experienced the pain of abortion. As I sat with women who shared their stories and their pain, I became a witness to the long-term impact of abortion in people's lives. I saw grace and healing offered by others and by God. Abortion to me now has many faces. This has broken something inside me, as I think it should break all of us who live in communities with those who are making what seem like impossible choices that will change the direction of their lives forever. Somewhere in these years, my mother told me a story, and I still wonder why she chose to tell me. It was after the war. She was married and already had 2 children. One of those children had died of diphtheria. She found herself pregnant again. It was a time of uncertainty and fear. Strongly influenced by her mother, who told her this was no time to bring a child into the world, she went to a doctor and told him she wanted an abortion. She told me all she could remember seeing was a crucifix on the wall and hearing the doctor telling her that she should be ashamed of herself. She said she ran out of the room and never went back, but she was glad that she didn't abort me. I was the person my grandmother was afraid to allow into the world. She might have thought she was protecting me from the kind of pain she had experienced in her life. Abortion is only an idea and a political issue until we see the face of real people who are faced with unreal circumstances and little support. With 1 in 3 women in Canada and as many men choosing abortion as their way out of an unintended pregnancy, we have all seen their faces, whether we know it or not. They are your sisters, your brothers, your mothers, your fathers, your aunts and uncles and friends. And if the statistics are correct, they may be some of you. Our faith tells us they are all people made in the image and loved by God. How will we choose to respond? That is what I believe the basis on this on which this discussion needs to be grounded. And that's where I came from in my paper.
Yeah, thank you. So good. So I'm going to ask the same question of you as I asked Dave. What do you hear or see that reveals there could be a dissonance between what we say we believe as Christians and how we live, specific to the topic of abortion?
Well, I would say my favorite thing about the church, it's very messy like all of us. And my most unfavorite are the people, because we have such a diversity of opinion and we are pretty aggressive in how we do it. So I think there is a disconnect with the concept of loving those made in the image of God and how we speak about this issue and to this issue. And I think most people, I always go, they do this. If we don't see it, it doesn't exist. It doesn't happen in my church. And I see many people who come from a faith background or who were from a faith background who have moved away from the church because of what they hear said and spoken, if it's spoken about at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've had a pastor, a male pastor, say to me, and he's been pastoring probably 25 years, say, I've never had a woman come and tell me that she's had an abortion. Like, can I actually trust these stats? Aren't they a bit overinflated? I mean, what would you say to something like that?
They absolutely not. What they will tell us, people who have had abortions, who've experienced or are asking those questions, are very sensitive, and they pick up very quickly whether or not it's a safe place. And I think probably if you haven't heard it, or if you haven't had people come to you, it's either you haven't addressed the issue, or people know intuitively that it's not safe.
Right. Yeah. And it is, no doubt it's harder for women to go to their male pastor than it would be if there was a female on staff. So
But for every woman, there's a man.
yeah,
They're not going either.
right. Yeah, very true. And that's another topic we don't necessarily don't talk about much, is the men that are involved. You don't do this on your own as a woman. I'm going to pop back to Dave. Again, if you have questions, if you maybe something in Jutta's story, Dave's story so far that it's percolating, put it down and we'd love to address that. So back to you, Dave. Where do you think people in our congregations are getting their information about these topics, about the topics of sanctity of life that you mentioned, xenophobia, First Nations, abortion, human trafficking, and medical assistance in dying? See how fast we can say those by the end of the day.
Yeah.
And what do you think is influencing the values and the opinions and their decisions on this?
Yeah, that's a big question. When I think back to when I first started in ministry, one of the things that I wanted to do was bring in a group, we did actually do that, bring in a group from our local crisis pregnancy center to speak on issues around sexuality and all those kinds of things. And so we did that, but we got such pushback from parents about teaching their kids about having this conversation with kids about sexuality. And so our response to them was, okay, if we choose not to do this anymore, then where are they going to be gathering their information? Are you having these conversations at home? And so the percentage of parents who are having these healthy, well-rounded, open conversations at home are extremely small. And then we are not speaking about it in a congregational setting. So that leaves schools, and there's also a difference between schools and playgrounds, and media and news and advertising. And so that's, we're kind of leaving our people then to be influenced by everything else, and we're hoping that they'll just choose the right way without actually helping them to process all that they're thinking about. And so that's kind of the biggest challenge. They learn these all the way along the way, and they don't know how to speak life, to understand the fullness of life and the value of life as God looks at it, or as the sanctity of life as we're talking about. Then we end up just almost kind of where we're at, where we divide people based on what they think or what they don't think, or how they act or they don't act. And it just becomes, well, we've got a mess. So, yeah. That's kind of the significance of being proactive and having these conversations in a regular rhythm that reflects God's compassionate love for all people.
So I'm gonna ask everybody's involvement at this stage. I want to get your fingers moving. So if you go down to the bottom of your screen and you click on chat, it'll give you a chance to chat to everyone. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to put in there, what is the topic of the 5 that you see coming up the most, that people want to talk about or they've got questions about? So just put kind of most and then the topic. And what's the one that you never hear anyone in your congregation talking about? Let's just do this as kind of an informal straw poll. Ask everybody to try and do it. Just give us a quick rundown. What are the topics? What are you hearing in your congregation? I'll give you like 30 seconds to get that down. So I'm seeing abortion, relationship to First Nations, abortion, assisted end of life, First Nations. Don't hear about human trafficking, abortion, First Nations, human trafficking. So I think the only one we really haven't seen come up there is the xenophobia or racism, and some of that may be number one is abortion. So that definitely gives us some in that it continues to be a topic that I think the church is unfortunately probably divided in. It's been hard to get our it's hard to get a message across. It's hard to get what is the Christian response in that? And so Jutta, let's turn back to you. What concerns do you have about kind of the way the church has responded to the abortion issue, and then maybe also so that we don't lose hope, give us some examples of churches that are doing well.
Well, one of the things, I mean, we are we really talking about it? We have Sanctity of Life Sunday, but do we ever have someone get up? I mean, churches have to take care of their pulpit time, but do we ever have someone get up who actually has had this experience? So that's one of my concerns. It's a hugely polarized topic within the church. I will tell you a couple of stories. One, I went to a viewing of something. I'm not going to go into that, but the church then, there was a whole bunch of leaders from churches, and they then spoke about it. And they spoke from a perspective of anger, we're warfare, we're up in arms. And I knew that in that place there were women and probably men who had had the experience of abortion, and it was all aggressive and negative, and we're going to win. And it just broke my heart. And it wasn't that they were saying things that were necessarily wrong. It was just, there was absolutely, from my perspective, zero expressions of love and care for people. And then on the other hand, I had a pastor come to me, and he first checked out who I was and what my theology was, which was kind of fun. But then he asked me some questions, and he was going to present, and he called it the elephant in the room, this topic to his congregation of abortion. And so as we talked, he just so slowly started to change how he was going to approach it. And he asked me to come, and we spent the whole morning service doing a back and forth dialogue about it from a people perspective. And what was beautiful at the end of it, I was at the front, and people came up to me and they felt safe to share their personal experiences and stories. And that told me that this was a very safe place. Mm-hmm. So, there's different ways of doing it. And it's much easier to do the political rhetoric and get everybody up in arms, because that's what we're seeing in the media as well. We're seeing the secular world shout one thing, so we get on the other side and shout another. That helps no one, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. If I can just interject a personal example here. When I preach at Center Street, I often try to include as an example somewhere in the message. It's not like every time I do it, but even just saying the word abortion makes the church a safe place to come forward. And I know you have said to me, you often will get quite a flood of calls in the next week when I've said something like that just from the pulpit. And it isn't the big story. It's just, sometimes it's just part of an example. Sometimes it is a story, and then I always have women coming up to me afterwards and wanting to talk who've had an abortion. And so I think talking about it, but then we also have to be prepared. Okay, just because we say the word abortion in the sermon or something about it, how do we be prepared then? To reach out, to walk along these women and men who have had abortions, yeah, let's go there, Jutta, then we'll come back to Dave to talk kind of more broadly about that. But so from the abortion perspective, how do we, what does it mean to be pro-life more than just talk about it?
I think, like Dave said before, you have to get prepared to walk into the messy long term. And people who are struggling with this issue are really hurting, or they're really questioning. And I think what doesn't happen is people forget that listening is the most important thing you do. So if you don't have a lot of information, you actually just really ask good questions and listen, and then find out, because people are open. If you just say, you know, I don't know a lot about this, I'm going to get some information, I'm going to get you some help. That is probably the most useful thing you can do. Us telling people, I think what we do often is we shame people from the pulpit, and then they hide or leave. And that isn't very helpful. You know, yes, it is a sin. Yes, it is wrong. But is it helpful to, people are already saying those things to themselves. So I think when you know, it's how you approach it. And if it isn't done in love and gentleness, and looking at the congregation and thinking 1 in 3 people here has had this experience. What are they hearing when I say these words? You have to put yourself in that place. And it's very easy to get the information. Come talk to someone who works with people who have had these struggles.
Yeah, learn from people who've spent time. So there's been, you know, we saw that abortion was kind of the number 1 topic that came up. Again, I want you to go to your chat, and I want you to put in, if you can, what's the question that you get asked, or that you have around this? We've got probably Canada's top pregnancy care provider in our midst today, with Jutta. So what, if you could ask her anything, what would that be? And I'm going to give you a minute to do, just to put that in a chat, and we'll tally those. Krista has done some tallying for us from those original ones, and the most talked about, or most, you know, the concern you have at the highest is abortion, and then First Nations, and the least is human trafficking. Interesting. It's almost like that has become a bit, oh yeah, we've dealt with that, which I think is a risk for that. So First Nations, I don't think we can say that that's unique to any particular area, because the way the news, things that have hit the news over the last 8 months in terms of residential schools, it's touched every Canadian. Dave, can you, while people are writing down their questions around abortion, can you speak to, you know, you provided a powerful call to action, and let's think about this maybe in terms of the issue of or the topic of First Nations. Tell us a bit about how you came to those 4 action items, and can you kind of make it specific to what that might look like around the First Nations topic?
Sure. Yeah, and I just want to just share a little bit of what 2 sentences out of Jutta's paper. She says, when an issue becomes a war of words and ideology, civil discourse is lost. Polarization helps no one. Personhood is diminished, and the heart of the issue is quickly forgotten in the heat of battle. And so that's a quote from her paper that I love, and it applies to all of these. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, the church can contribute to simply giving words without valuable action to take with it. And then the other part is we tend to move towards what can we participate in too quickly. Again, understanding a church calendar. And so we have Sanctity of Life Sunday. Here's something you can do. Okay, there's abortion that's off the list, and you can go on across many things. And so we've addressed it now. Let's move on. And so that's been part of my frustration, obviously, because there's this messiness of life that still goes on after a Sanctity of Life Sunday. But we feel we've accomplished what we set out to do by highlighting the topic and ignoring the tragedy of the lives that are involved. And so searching scripture, what do we do with things, giant messes, people's lives where we're caught in the swirl of what is right and what is wrong and how to deal with it? And lament is actually, as you read through that and you come across that in scripture, it's actually something that, at least maybe it's not in your particular area, but in many of our areas, it's something that is missing, because lament really helps us to pour out all the stuff that is clogging our minds and our hearts, and helps us to realign with God, and then allow him to start directing our steps out of that. And that is, to me, that's a huge first anchor piece that is missing in a lot of. So
sorry,
so,
you cut out there for a second. You said it's missing in a lot of, and then we didn't hear a lot of.
In a lot of our congregational expressions, where we can address a topic, we can say why it's wrong, but we don't actually call people to kind of pour out their own feelings, to teach them to go to God with it first, and to understand that there might be opportunity to address something. So as it relates to First Nations, for us locally here where we are in Southwestern Ontario, we are between two First Nations reserves here that are pretty close by, and most recently in the summer of 2020, there were a number, unusually, there was a number of unsolved murders that took place in our area, which is really strange for the quietness with which we normally lead our lives. One of those took place on one of the reserves. 5 of those had significant media attention on radio and in print. The one that took place on the reserve had almost nothing. And we happened to, the mother of the victim happened to be somebody that we had an association with. And so we delved into that a little bit deeper for ourselves. And as a leadership team, we took time to do just this. Let's lament this. Let's bring this to God. Where do we go with this? And then we went out and we met with her, and to understand, okay, what is it? Where is it that if we were to be able to do something, how does that most benefit? Where's the greatest help that we can have in this? Because the reality is, it's still an unsolved murder, but it's buried here, right? And so, but because of our relationship, and now a continuing relationship, we continue to make sure that they know that this boy's life has value to God, and their hurt is the hurt that they feel is significant to God. And so we can't fix their situation, but we can express the holiness of life to them, where they don't necessarily receive that in a greater community context. Does that help?
Yeah, no, I think that's, and the lament, we don't do that very well, do we, in our evangelical, and I don't mean this denomination, I mean within the evangelical world. We like to try and, well, let's at least look at the way the cup is half full, not what we're missing. And so but then the listen and the learn, being learners, getting to know Indigenous people in your community, and listening, taking a posture of wanting to hear their stories is so respectful. And
Yeah, the listening and learning too, like, so that follows out of that, right? When we
yeah,
understand confessing our, to be able to confess our own biases,
yeah,
and then that frees us to really be ambassadors of Christ to whatever situation we find ourselves in, and to then ask, as Jutta already talked about, ask questions, learn from their experience. Don't
yeah,
often we are so quick to provide our solutions, which are often disassociated with their own experience. And so listening and learning are key. I think that the last two we can kind of get, loving and living it out. Probably maybe loving, we understand. Living it out is the long-term implication of it.
mm,
Um, and so, but the listening, the lament and listening and learning, that takes time. And
right.
you mentioned in terms of past, or somebody saying, if people who have had an abortion are willing to share that with their pastor, it takes time to develop trust for those kinds of things. Those are wounds people
Mhm.
hold, and they hold them. They're deep, and you poke those things, and you have to be able to. They have to know that they're in a safe place to be able to heal if they're going to
Right.
expose themselves.
Yeah,
And so we have to work hard
yeah,
with that,
yeah,
in that sense. But the living it out piece, I think, involves getting involved in our community with finding organizations that speak into these issues and participating in what they're doing. That's part of the living it out. Is let's get closer, not only to the issues, but to the people who are affected by these issues.
yeah, that's really good. But I think all of those principles can be, the idea was are transferable or applicable to any of the issues. So thank you for putting some questions in the chat. So Jutta, we've got some here around abortion. Is there ever a reason why abortion is legitimate? For instance, rape. And then I'm going to tuck that in with one of the other ones from John. How do you support those carrying guilt from having a pregnancy ended due to a threat to the mother's life? They understand in their head, but their heart condemns them. Can you speak to those two?
Yeah. Well, and I think it, rather than legitimate, I think it's certainly understandable. But I also caution, I mean, it's always the question that comes up, and a pregnancy due to rape is actually a rare statistically. And so abortion due to rape is quite rare. But I think we need to also look at any abuse, sexual abuse, rape is a violation of the woman's personhood. I always say it steals her soul, and it is a huge trauma. And I think in my experience, I have seen women make both choices. Adding another trauma or another, I'm going to use a very strong word here, violation to her body, doesn't necessarily make it better. Now she's got two things, and one of them was at her own, at her own bequest or with pressure. So I think that we have to be really, really careful here. To not condemn, to understand and to listen, but also to recognize that one trauma, adding another trauma, doesn't necessarily serve her well. And if we're looking at it from the perspective of the woman, have we actually served her when we give her what would feel like the compassionate solution? I have seen women walk through this and come out the other side stronger and braver with the support. Also with the same with the medical, that's a huge issue that we have to be very, very tender with. And I've walked with people who've had both experiences, who have terminated because of a medical issue, and also who have carried and walked through the whole process. I think what we have to do is walk with them and actually encourage them to grieve the loss, grieve all the losses that are in there, and make sure that they're not alone in that, and make sure that they have support and good counsel and probably professional counsel in both of those situations. And I would say for a church, as a pastor, you're not probably equipped to do professional counseling in this. You have to look up to outside sources and get help outside. You can't be everything to everybody. So, these are tough questions, and it's one case at a time, one person at a time, walking with them through the pain and the mess of that. And lament is the perfect piece, Dave, that we have forgotten, to lament with them and weep with them, as we're called to do.
Yeah, and that leads into Paul's question where he says, are there examples of churches in Canada who offer pregnancy care, postpartum care, or even adoption assistance, as we often see in the US? And where do we access resources for actual action for mothers facing unwanted or unplanned pregnancies?
Well, I would say the church sometimes tries to do everything, and the church is sometimes not a safe place. I always say people enter our doors who would never darken the door of a church. So basically there are good organizations out there in community. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to be the expert to everything. I think being educated and aware and knowing where to properly refer. And I think one of the things that I think the church is afraid to do is refer to good organizations outside the secular community or outside the Christian community. There are wonderful secular organizations also who can help you, deal with some of the issues like abuse, like the trauma that's experienced. But I do think, and professional counseling, I think we need to expand our view and get very aware of the resources in the community. It frustrates me when here we are, we've got the resources, we've done this for a million years, and someone tries to work with it themselves without the knowledge, and they can sometimes do more harm than good. So, do no harm, assess and refer appropriately it's what we do. If we can't deal with it, we assess and refer appropriately. And I think churches should do that as well.
I'll just put a little plug in there that Jutta is available. If you're want to know kind of specific what might be available in your community, because not all pregnancy care centers are created equally. Some may come much more from almost a shame-based approach. There's a risk of that. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Jutta, but there can be that. And so feel free to reach out to Jutta and just to find out. She's very connected across Canada on organizations. And it also, do you want to do a little plug right now for Living in Color and the programs that you have online, because you've really developed that?
I was going to say, one of the gifts of COVID, which sounds really bizarre, is that we've been able to extend our reach, and we are counseling people in other countries. We are counseling people in our peer counseling in, across Canada, and providing right now our post-abortion group. And we have a post-abortion one-to-one mini group and small group that is called Living in Color, that was developed in our center, that we have been doing for many, many years. And we have trained and facilitated this year over 100 people across Canada, and we've even facilitated training in New Zealand. So we have the ability to serve and to help each other because of Zoom. We've got right now, I think we're seeing a woman from the States, and we're seeing a woman from Eastern Europe in our post-abortion group, and that's been the beauty of it, and it works. I have, over the last almost 2 years, seen clients only on Zoom. We've just walked that way. I've never actually met them, and it's been very productive. And we've done our groups that way too. So it's a door that's open for us. You can find excellent resources, and it doesn't have to be in your community.
Yeah, and for some women, just even walking in the door of a pregnancy care center can be overwhelming. And so to kind of the what's the word I'm looking for? Anonymity of the internet actually has worked in favor during this. A question that came to mind when you said about COVID. How have you seen COVID impact, abortion rates or pregnancy rates? And I like the phrase you used in your paper, unintended pregnancies. Tell us why you use that phrase, and then what have you seen that as a result, impact of COVID?
Yeah, well, the stats are 45% of all pregnancies are unintended. So, so I think we need to be aware that it could happen to anyone, and it's there's words have such strong meanings. And, we used to call ourselves years and years ago crisis pregnancy, but people who I thought were in crisis didn't see themselves in crisis. That was somebody else. So I think using, the words that are, oh yeah, unintended is different than crisis. So that's one of the reasons we do that. I would also say that the anonymity of the call or Zoom, we have started working with men specifically on purpose, doing something called Dad Lab on Zoom, because men don't want to walk into a pregnancy care center. It's very intimidating. And women that have had abortions often don't want to walk into any place that has the word pregnancy in it. So I think just being very aware of words and being creative and thinking outside the box, and how can we reach people? And I think that's one of the things that we have been able to do through COVID. I would say abortion rates have probably gone up significantly during COVID. What we're seeing is a great deal of fear and uncertainty, and that is really, really difficult to watch, because the consequences down the road are going to be there as well in people's lives. And understandably, if you've lost your job, if you're, if you are hearing the horror stories about going into hospital, even, if you're thinking about being isolated with your newborn all alone, which we're seeing a lot of right now, it's terrifying. And if you don't have someone to talk to. So I think for the community to be out there, making opportunities for people to actually talk to people, whether it's on Zoom or on the phone or anywhere else, but that's critical.
Yeah, and that's kind of another example of a way that you could actually just weave the mention of abortion in, or an unintended pregnancy, right? As an example, if you're talking about a way maybe that people are experiencing fear, include that as part of the example, and it allows you the conversation to happen afterwards. So I still struggle to say unintended pregnancy without hesitating, but it's such a good term. There was another question here. Can you comment on the difference between the grief attached to carrying the baby to term and adopting versus abortion?
Yeah, and I would tell you the grief of adoption is huge, and I think we need to understand that. And I equate it to, it's almost like the death of a child, because you are giving up your right to parent a child. The difference is there is a future. Most of the women who have walked through carrying the pregnancy and have placed, and they know that they are going to be grieving. They've done something self-sacrificial for the sake of another. And there's something about that really is self-affirming, I think. They often do well when they're well supported. If they're not well supported, it can go equally badly. If they're not allowed to grieve, if they're not encouraged to grieve, then it can be very negative as well. Abortion is a grief that they often don't feel able to or allowed to express, and so it goes underground. And when grief goes underground, when emotion goes underground, it often has impact in your life that you are not prepared for.
I want to go back to Dave here for a minute. You wrote this as a pastor, also as a scholar, having done your doctorate. You're used to writing big documents. But how would you say, and I'm putting you on the spot here, how would you say that the process of working through this idea of sanctity of life changed you as a pastor? Or impacted you as a pastor?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it has really, it's helped me to crystallize some thoughts that I had randomly rolling around, and understand that they are synthesized together. And I think it's really taught me, it continues to teach me a lot about taking time, how important it is to take time with the person right in front of you. So every person is special because they're created in the image of God.
Hmm.
Every person has a story. Often that story involves some kind of hurt. We all have experienced something. And so there's a story behind the words that they say. There's a story behind the look in their eyes. And if you can lean in long enough to listen and learn from them, then you gain the trust to be able to deal with some of those things. And I think that's probably one of the most significant things for me. And probably the other thing, and Jutta mentioned this, and I want to reinforce that, is as a pastor, I don't need to have all the answers. I shouldn't. There's no way I can. Life is way too messy and complex. But in every community, God places resources. And maybe those resources don't come under the umbrella of a church. And maybe those resources don't even come from a Christian organization. But there is expertise and there's skill that is valuable for us to get to know. And if we can develop relationships with those organizations, then we not only have respect with those organizations, but then we develop trust from the people we want to help, and we can come alongside to add that biblical perspective to some of those other things that they're going to get. And one of the things that we've been learning is, and I'm much more aware of this now, that all of those organizations that we would think, well, they're not Christian organizations, but they all have a holistic understanding of a person, and they know that a spiritual element is important. And if we, as a church, we have the opportunity, as we bridge those relationships, to speak the name of Jesus, to fill the spiritual gap with the name of Jesus, and that has tremendous benefit over a long period of time. And so our energy might be better served getting to know them, those organizations, so that we can then also serve the people who come to us with need.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. It's kind of like, you never know how God's going to use that, right? Both to equip you, but then provide opportunities to speak of his love to the person that you're partnering with. So great.
I actually just had a conversation like that this morning. As a church, we are hosting an event for the local sexual assault center together with victim services, and next week. And the director said, why do you guys do this? Right? Like, we don't hear of churches doing stuff like this. And so I got to share with her just what I shared with you. It's amazing. But that's what happens, because often these are nonprofit organizations that are struggling with their funding. And so if we can figure out ways to affirm the good that they're doing and speak into that and serve them, then even though their mandates are maybe closed off technically to churches, their practice is so much more open. And so anyway, that's just something.
Yeah, and be prepared.
I didn't set that up. That's just something God did today.
Be prepared to share the hope within, right?
Yeah.
So that's so good. As we kind of draw a close here before we go into our breakout groups, Jutta, I want to give you a chance to just kind of give us a quick synopsis of the 7 ways to be pro-life with impact that you share. Just kind of give us a quick rundown on that, please.
All right, I think I'd like you just to, I always think of abortion as the tip of the iceberg. Underneath abortion is all of the things that we've been talking about. And those are the things, if you don't get to the key piece of the issue or the underlying piece of the issue, you're actually not solving anything. So I think first of all, I agree with you, Dave. I think education, don't be afraid to talk to your children, your congregation about sexuality. Our children are being informed about sexuality by porn a lot. We're letting that industry inform our children because we're afraid to talk about it. And I think we need to talk openly and clearly about how to think about God's good gift of sexuality in positive ways. I think we need to be mentoring each other. Women and men should be mentoring younger. That's our mandate and our call. If you haven't got young people or someone you're mentoring in your life as a believer, what are you doing? Right? We need to be caring for other people and letting them know how we would support them if something like that should happen. I think we need to be actually calling men to responsibility. I think abortion is always made to be the woman's issue, and often, unfortunately, women are shamed and blamed in that situation, and we are not dealing with the responsibility of men and training up our young men and talking about the issues like how to treat the other gender who is also made in God's image as an equal and as a co-inheritor. I really think that's critical. And I think really getting out there and supporting in whatever way you can. I always say, get out there and do something. If all of us did something, one thing to make a difference in this area, we could change the world. I really believe it. Get together instead of polarizing, instead of, talking, working together as a community with other people who are like-minded or not even like-minded, but who have a value for women and children and men, work together to make things better so that no one has to make or feels like they have to make that choice, because really people generally make that choice because they feel they have no other. So let's support single families. Let's support adoption. Let's support women who've experienced and men who've experienced the grief of abortion by finding them places where they can heal and walking with them. No one should do this alone. And there are far too many isolated people in our communities, and it's messy. And as Dave said before, it's long-term, and they may not end up doing what you think they should do, and you still have to stick with it. I'm still in contact with people I have mentored or came through the doors of our center over 20 years ago, and we're still connecting, and their lives haven't been easy or not messy, but it's been a safe place, and they can come back. And those are the relationships that are life-changing. We can change generations if we do this.
Well, and I think that's the key for all of these topics is what is the basis, where do we need to set a different groundwork if we're going to impact the like you said, the top of the pyramid of abortion and medical assistance in dying and human trafficking. There's groundwork that needs to be done, and it's so easy just to go after the issue. So I think that's hopefully a takeaway today. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into breakout rooms. You'll be put in that. There'll be 3 or 4, depending on how our numbers are, per room. And you're gonna have 12 minutes. So if there's 3 of you, that means you have 4 minutes each. Just kind of keep track of the time so everybody has a chance to share. There's 2 questions. What did I learn today? So how's is there something that you hadn't thought about? And I need to think more about that, or that was new to me. And then the second thing is, what is one thing that I can do to honor life in my community that's unique to that? And then if you do have questions, feel free to jot those down, and then you can come back into the chat afterwards and put those in. But go and just to take this as an opportunity to learn from each other as part of this. So head out to breakout, and then we'll have just a few minutes when we come back. Okay. I want to, this came up in our group. I want to let you know that there are more papers coming from SALT. There will be papers that are on human trafficking, Indigenous issues, MAID, and racism. I'm not sure what order they're going to come out in, but do watch for those. And then our plan will be to do webinars like this, whether we do 1 or 2 at a time, yet to be seen, but certainly plan to continue with the dialogue and the resources for you as pastors. And if you have suggestions that you would like to see it done differently, and more topics, please do send that. That can go through your regional minister. It can come directly to SALT. Myself, Harold Johnsrud, who's on this call, who is our chairperson for SALT, and very, very thankful for that. So watch for future resources on it. I also want to just reiterate that Dave and Jutta are both available for consultation following this. They're available to help, to talk through ideas, struggles. Maybe you've got something very specific to your setting. You think, man, I would just like to talk to somebody. I think one of the things we've heard today is having the posture of a listener is really powerful for the person that's involved. So this chance, you get to be the talker, and you can find somebody else that's a listener on that. Dave is also, he's part of the EMCC Connect, so you can find him that way. And for Jutta, Katie has put her email there, jutta@praycare.ca. Yeah, very happy to walk with you to provide resources as well. I'm just going to quickly turn it over to Nicole, and she's going to talk about future webinars that are coming up. Nicole?
Rosemary, could I just correct that? It's jutta@praycare.com.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Nicole.
And Dave's an EMCC Enrich facilitator, so you can find him on the Enrich website. Yeah, so hi everybody, nice to see some of your faces. Our next EMCC Connected event that Krista and Katie have worked to put together is a World Partners Prayer Gathering. So that is on Friday, November 19th at 9 a.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Eastern. It concludes a week of Global Partners and Workers campaign, where we're highlighting stories of dependency and trust on Jesus that our workers and partners have continued to demonstrate through this time of COVID and post-COVID. So if you would like to sign up to receive those reflections in your inbox day by day, feel free to send me an email. And I know that Katie will throw up a link as well to the link to be registered for the next Connected event. So thanks so much, and hope to see some of you there.
Awesome. In closing, Jutta, we're going to end on a high note by asking you, what is one thing that has encouraged you over the last week or two in your ministry?
We are just absolutely growing and are open to serving more people. We've had probably an average of more than 50 calls a day coming in, which is encouraging. And we've got a whole bunch of new programs that we are going to be able to reach more people. We're going to be doing a new program called basically Parenting in Canada for immigrants to Canada. And I think there's just so many opportunities if you're open to doing things differently. So that's really exciting. I'm also really excited to have COVID end and have actual people back in the center, because it's getting a little tired. But yeah, we've had some wonderful opportunities, and we just had a wonderful online event, which is really difficult to do. So yeah. That's been
awesome. I love the example that you gave. You're truly pro-life. It's an honoring of life. So Dave, would you close us out with a prayer blessing, please, over the pastors and leaders in our denomination?
Sure. Thanks everybody for taking the time out of your schedule to join us. I just want to read for you these verses from Lamentations chapter 3. And often we are reminded about the faithfulness of God. They're new every morning, right? His mercies are new every morning. But if you continue to read through, it says in verse 55, I call on your name, Lord, from the depths of the pit. You heard my plea. Do not close your ears to my cry for relief. And then it says, you came near when I called you, and you said, do not fear. That is God's promise to us. That is part of what he desires to do. As we, in a world of confusion, as we call out to him, he comes near and he helps us to elevate our voice to provide hope for the hopeless. So Father, we give you thanks that you love life. And in a world of competing messages that divide and trivialize life, you have spoken to us and redeemed ours. So thank you for that, for the life of Jesus. And thank you for the privilege that you give us to serve others with that same purpose. And would you, despite the struggles that we face in our own hesitations and with our own biases, Father, would you break free of that and just renew us with a desire to speak life into our church families, and into our communities. Would you lead us in those paths where the darkness is most likely to persist, that the light of Jesus might shine and make a difference and draw people into your kingdom, men and women and boys and girls. We desire to see them redeemed, restored, and walking with you in the fullness of life. I commit these leaders and their representatives to you as well. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you so much for joining us, and see you next time. Those that are on the SALT, part of the SALT team, can you just don't go off? We want to do a quick debrief. But everybody else, have a great day, and reach out as you need resources. Thanks so much.